Welcome to the Redhead Reveal podcast. I am Jenn Pinkerton, your Redhead host, a psychotherapist, high-performance coach, writer, and speaker. As a connection expert, I help people reveal their connectedness within relationships, transforming from the root causes of beliefs and behaviors that hold them back from thriving in life. Let's talk about how you're thriving. Today, we have everything you ever wanted to know about an open marriage and more. Okay, I'm excited to have Molly Winter, author of New York Times bestselling book, More, a Memoir of an Open Marriage. You've had so many essays in The Cut, Time Magazine. You've talked about open marriage and what you love about it. I cannot wait for you to tell all of our listeners and viewers today all about open marriage. So welcome, Molly.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. This book was really riveting. And I, as a psychotherapist and a sex therapist, I do a lot of work around polyamory and different types of relationships. And this is very much something that I wanted to talk about because there's still a lot of people who don't have a comfort level even around the conversation, much less around having that in their life. So I want to normalize that it is great for people to have whatever kind of relationship you want to have. And I love being able to talk to someone like you who's really put this out there and your personal experience to be able to talk about that. So what kind of led you to get to this point to write more?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I'll start by saying we opened our marriage in 2008. We got married in 1999. So we're actually about to celebrate our 25th anniversary next week.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But we were 9 years in, and back in 2008, I will say there was not a lot of normalizing of non-monogamy, of open marriage. I don't even think I had that language. What I thought I was doing at the time was having kind of conducting an experiment, really, which felt like a very high stakes experiment, to be clear. I didn't go into it intentionally exactly. I was the mother of two young children at the time. Now they're grown, but at the time they were 3 and 6. And I was really kind of at the end of my rope as a young mom that I think a lot of people can relate to. It's really hard to retain your identity when you're in the midst of those roles, those all-consuming roles of wife and mother. And the way it began for us is I just kind of stormed out of the house one night when my husband got home late from work and had missed the kids' bedtime. I just went to clear my head. And a friend of mine dragged me into a bar and I ended up, flirting with a younger guy all night. And it was very exhilarating. I didn't expect it to lead where it led. And that's the story I tell in More. I began by, telling my husband that I had met this guy. I kind of told him under duress a little bit because he saw a text. But my husband, to his credit, encouraged me to pursue it further. And that is that kind of conversation that I think so many people fear, that if you have a feeling, a desire, even flirtation with another person outside of your marriage, there, I think, is a lot of fear around sharing that with your partner. In my experience, though, he was the exact person I needed to share it with. And I think the fact that we had some conversation and some experience around non-monogamy before we got married helped us in that moment. But I never thought I was going to have an open marriage. And I never thought that I was going to end up where I am now, which is really living a polyamorous lifestyle in which, I have multiple partners that I love. And so does my husband. This was not on my to-do list. This was not on my bucket list for life. And it was a complicated journey and it wasn't always easy. So that was the main reason I told the story in my book. Because I didn't feel like there were a lot of stories out there as to how one goes about navigating these waters.
Well, I mean, from just the beginning of that story, right when you told your husband, when he saw a text, that's when what I think in more typical type of scenarios, there would have been a lot of drama, a lot of escalation, a lot of talks about where is this marriage going? Is it over? Is there infidelity? And people would have gone in their separate corners.
Yeah.
But what happened differently is that the two of you stayed united and to trying to talk this through and understand what it felt like, what it looked like, and what each of you were feeling in the moment.
Yeah. And, that it wasn't always easy. And I tried to show in the book, I don't want to sugarcoat my own marriage and make it seem like we had it all figured out from the get-go. I think we have a deep love for one another, a deep commitment to one another, and a deep belief in, our partnership. But we also had curiosity about what else was out there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not easy to maintain a primary relationship and open yourself up to these other relationships, but nor is monogamy easy, to be fair. I mean, whatever relationship structure you choose, and the structure can change over time. We were fully monogamous for the first 9 years of our marriage as we were kind of starting our family and everything. But I think that there are lots of challenges to be faced if you're choosing monogamy also, or maybe a different type of non-monogamy than what we have. But yeah, I think it is of paramount importance to, if you want to keep your marriage or your relationship alive, having your partner be your key, partner in communication as well. There's no way around it. You have to, and which means you have to admit some hard truths to yourself as well. I didn't know what I wanted, and I had to figure it out as I went through these subsequent years.
Well, and that change requires a significant amount of self-reflection to be able to really dig a little bit deeper about what am I looking for in my relationship? What do I need to make me happy? Do I have unmet needs? What does this look like? And I think a lot of people don't take an opportunity to self-reflect on their marriage, regardless of being faced with this type of opportunity or decision. Just in general, there's a lack of an idea of, hey, we need to be consistently understanding how we're feeling, how we're feeling about everything.
Yeah, right. And I think key to all of that too is your own relationship with yourself, which changes over the course of a lifetime.
Right.
I met my husband when I was 23 years old. We got married when I was 26. I was a mom at 29, which isn't terribly young, but in my circles in New York, I'm one of the younger mothers. But there's a lot of growth that happens after your 20s. And so I'm so grateful that I have a partner that is willing to kind of go through these different phases of life at my side without feeling like it's a rejection of him if there's some things I want to explore that don't always involve him. I mean, they involve him in terms of our communication, but I think it's a hard thing. It takes a lot of security and self-confidence to get through it as well.
And I think that you're absolutely right on that. You have to be able to understand who you are, and you've got to have a baseline level of feeling good about yourself to be able to even enter in this concept. Because if there's a lot of insecurity or a lot of low self-worth, no one is going to be able to sustain a sense of not feeling like they're not enough. And the way you bypass that is to have a very good idea about who you are, and to have a strong degree of self-esteem, and not have your partner or your partner's actions or lack thereof be the deciding factor about your own worth,
Yeah. And one thing I really discovered especially in those early years of opening our marriage, is that I was outsourcing my self-worth. I was not feeling good about myself. And I wanted my husband to make me feel good. I wanted him to make me happy. And that's just not something another person has the power to do. And
Absolutely.
So as I started looking to others, and, primarily men, I'm a Gen Xer. I feel like I was raised with the idea that you get your self-worth from men, reacting to you in a certain way. And as I was aging, and as I was, feeling maybe like less sexually desirable, each of my relationships helped teach me something about my own self-worth and my need to give myself whatever I was looking for outside of myself. And so it's kind of ironic that, looking for other relationships led me into deeper relationship with myself, which has in turn led me back into other relationships, but from a much different standpoint. So now, the book ends in 2018 as I'm just kind of entering into a healthy phase, I think, of my life. And I'm still growing and learning. But 6 years from the end of where, more leaves off, I've continued to build relationships that are on a much more, uh, solid foundation just of my own needs and my own ability to meet people as equals, not as someone who's going to fill a gap.
Mm-hmm. And so what I'm hearing you say is so much of this journey was not just about non-monogamy. It was so much about understanding that, you are responsible for your own happiness and
Yeah.
you're going to find it in someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I might find different things or different facets of myself might be, reflected in different relationships. I can explore, for example, right now I have two other partners, and this is kind of a shorthand way of saying it. I think my relationships are complex in many ways, but I have one partner I've had for almost 4 years, and he doesn't have children, and he owns nightclubs, and he lives this very different kind of lifestyle, and he's from Australia, and he's traveled the world, and he brings something different into my life. And then I have a younger partner whose kids are still young, but we're exploring, we're both kind of into meditation and some of the more like consciousness expanding types of things. And I explore those things with him. And then my husband and I have this incredible bond too. So it's like I'm able to stretch myself and learn about myself in new ways through these relationships in a way I really value.
And so much of that is an act of you honoring yourself and being true to who you are, and to keep a sense of the excitement and being alive. I hear you
Yeah.
having these new adventures and new experiences. And for a lot of people, that's missing. And being able to find that in this way, because you and your husband are on the same page about it,
Right.
then it's really fulfilling, and that's, I think, the link is having a partner that's on the same page with you. That being said, as you maybe started or initiated this journey with meeting someone and the text, how does that look on his side? And I know maybe it's difficult to speak for him, but what can you tell us about how he felt about that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the hardest things for me was allowing him to have the same freedom that he was granted, right? And there are cases where they call it solo poly, where one person is polyamorous and the other person is
Right.
monogamous. And I know people who are in these partnerships, and it works for them. In some ways, sometimes I think when one partner has another passion entirely that they want to dedicate a lot of their time and life to, that works great because it kind of takes the pressure off. If they don't have time to be with their partner, every night of the week or things like that, and it gives a little release valve. So I think there are ways in which it can still feel balanced, even if one person might be having a relationship on the outside and the other person has like a business or a life goal or something else. But for my husband, yeah, we're very much on the same page. He also has other relationships that he gets, similar things from, but things that one thing he said to me early on was, he was not looking for someone who was like me. He's like, I've got you. I've got the best Molly there could ever be because you're it. So when I date, I'm not going to be looking for a replacement Molly. I'm going to be looking for something entirely different. And that has taken some of the initial sting out of it. When I don't really compare myself to his other relationships because I understand that. And it's also true that the longer you're in an open relationship, and in our case, I would say a very successful one, we continue to choose each other. So we still want to live together. We still have our own, sexual connection, and we have our own relationship that we still show each other that we value. So I don't ever worry that he's going to find another version of me that is a better version of me, because that's impossible.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so it's taken time though to kind of there's really no substitute for time because you don't know how it's all going to turn out at the beginning. And it's like when the years pass and dramas do happen, and I tried to show some of those low moments and dramatic hardships that happened along the way. Once you survive those and you're not even just together, but more solid in our case, the fear dissipates. And I don't have fear anymore about what it means if he, you know, he's not going to find another me. He's going to find hopefully, and I root for him in his relationships because I want him to be happy, and I see how he is growing and learning about himself through this, and that makes me happy for him.
And it just sounds like you're both a partnership and you're both looking for ways to feel fulfilled in your life, and you found something that works for you. And, you know, people who I have never experienced that can be very judgmental about that because it's very threatening. It's a threatening feeling that goes against what most people are brought up to believe this is what the norm is. But
Yeah.
there's something to having an open mind and understanding that, you know, it's also great for somebody who maybe looks at it and says, that's not for me. I
Yeah.
want those people to also be able to say, but I love that somebody else has figured what works for them, you know?
I will say none of my friends have open marriages. All of my
Okay.
friends, except for people, I've maybe met since the book came out, new friends. But all of my long-term friendships are with women who are in monogamous relationships. But one of the things that I keep hearing from people is having your story out there or, reading your book with my partner, whatever, we talked about, would we ever want this? And generally their conversations ended up in, nah, I don't want to do that. But it comes back to choosing monogamy consciously, right?
Right.
I did have one friend who, before the book came out, just through knowing my story, did have an interest in exploring it and talked to her husband about it, which was scary for her.
I'm
And
sure.
he said, no, I don't want to do that. But through that conversation, they got at the root of what she really wanted, which was, just kind of more freedom in her life in general. And so they negotiated some other ways that she might feel some of that freedom, which is what she was really seeking. And their marriage is a lot stronger because of it. So I think these conversations, whether you go back to, choosing kind of with more intention what you already have, or creating some room and space to continue growing as individuals in a way that doesn't necessarily have to lead to non-monogamy. I feel like the conversations can be so valuable, and that's the feedback I'm getting from some of my girlfriends anyway.
And it's so healthy to look at it that way because I encourage people to, talk about everything. If you're going to be having sex with this person, you should be able to talk about sex. If you're choosing to live a life with this person, you should be able to talk about all aspects and facets of your life. And I think so often that's missing because there's this fear of we don't want to upset the apple cart. We don't want to affect the status quo. We want everything to be okay. So we don't want to risk something. But the risk is actually the opposite. There's great risk in not being authentic and vulnerable to say this doesn't work for me, or hey, this one part of our relationship I'm not happy with, or our sex life is challenging to me, or in your case, I want more. Being
Yeah.
able to say that, I think, is the missing link of why a lot of relationships end. And especially as I see a lot of people who are married for a good long amount of time get to a later stage in their marriage where then suddenly it doesn't work for them anymore. Because in the beginning, a lot of relationships can be distracted by the act of raising children or being or achieving financial goals. There's joint goals that keep people focused and united. And then once those things either are reached or there's different acclamations in life that change, then sometimes people are left looking, going, wait a minute, okay, now I'm going to have to look at it because I'm not distracted by everything else.
Yeah.
I don't really like what I see. And then a
Yeah.
lot of people just divorce. But what would happen if instead of divorce, people could actually have conversations about what their needs are?
Yeah. And one of the things that I've been, not constantly, but it has come up. I have been accused of being anti-divorce. Like instead of just, people have written in comments, why don't they just get a divorce or whatever? I didn't get a divorce because I am continuing to learn and grow in my marriage, and I love my husband and I love our life. I
Mhm.
don't think there are times, though, I think when you're learning, like your own growth isn't happening and it can't happen within a relationship. And so I also am of a mind that not all, you know, it's not necessarily a failure to end a relationship. I feel like um, I want to go on the record for saying that, as saying that, because there are times when, you know, a marriage can't sustain the changes that are happening. But absolutely agree that if you don't have the conversations when you're feeling it, you're not giving it a fair shake. You're not, you know, sometimes you think, oh, there's no way my partner would agree to this thing that I think I need, so I better just end it. When in fact, maybe there is room for that growth within the relationship. So still agreeing with everything you're saying. I just want to clarify that I'm not saying you know, if you want monogamy and your partner is asking you for non-monogamy, or I know sometimes it happens that one partner cheats and then out of that infidelity wants to establish an open marriage. And that's tough. It's not impossible, but I think it's tough when you're working from a foundation of, you know, there's been some trust violation already, because
Right.
it does require a lot of trust and communication in order to open a marriage with some success, in my
Yes.
experience.
I mean, if there's a betrayal bond situation happening, there's been infidelity, I think it's a lot harder because you don't have that baseline of we're at the same place together. If
Right.
neither one of you has done that, you're at a baseline saying, okay, we're both faithful right now. We're both monogamous, but we're not comfortable with this. We want more. We want to talk about what would work. We want to explore it. And you're on even playing field, you know, but
Yeah.
if there is infidelity, that shifts it so much that sometimes that's a little difficult to right that ship again.
Yeah. Yeah. And I said, as I say, not impossible, but hard.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I too agree with you that divorce is not a failure. To me, the bigger failure is to stay in a place in life where you're unhappy. And
Yeah.
but I
Or
do think
inauthentic or
that's right.
hiding from yourself. Yeah.
Exactly. But I do think it's imperative that people have conversations. I'm not a proponent for people who just say, I'm going to get a divorce because I don't want to talk about the hard thing. You know,
Right.
I think people need to talk about hard things. And if you still end up leading to divorce, then that's what you need to be happy. Fine, albeit. But the fear of the repercussion sometimes is so great that people just end a relationship. And I think that is also a failure in a different way, you know, because we need to feel certain to talk about what we need and what makes us happy and to live authentic lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that being said, I want to start off with I know what is the biggest question from people, which is what are the rules? What are the boundaries? How do you and your husband navigate this in a way that you feel comfortable and he feels comfortable? What is that structure?
Yeah, well, this is a big part of the story of More. When we started out, we had a lot of rules, and our chief rule was no falling in love with anybody else,
Mm-hmm.
which, as most people would, you know, figure out immediately, is almost impossible to dictate. I do know people who do that, and they're, you know, more, I would say, in kind of the swinger camp of things, where you're
Right.
having really keeping sex to a casual thing, or
Mm-hmm.
you know, people might have a rule where you're only going to have, you know, flings, hookups when you're traveling for work, or if you're, you know, if you're not in your home city or things like that. And having those, that might work for some people. What I discovered is that that didn't work for me at all. What I was really longing for was connection with other people. And so what I had wanted out of that rule initially was to protect myself from losing my husband. I didn't want him to fall in love with somebody and risk that he was going to love them more and that I was going to be then, you know, abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
As time went on, I would say I probably experienced love outside of our marriage first. And because of that, I became aware that loving somebody else didn't make me love my husband less. If anything, it made me love him more because of our communication, and because, for two reasons, really. One was I felt like he was giving me this huge gift that in my marriage to him, I was still being allowed to have this outside experience, which was joyful. And there wasn't anybody who was like him. You know what I mean? There were still things about him that were always going to be, Stu, that's my husband. And I wasn't finding, a, a better Stu. I was just finding a different kind of person that was accentuating or complementing my marriage. So once I had that experience, then I felt like I could let him love someone else as well. And all the other rules just kind of fell away because the other rules had all been designed to keep that one rule in place. Like we had the rule of no dating anyone twice in 1 week, no sleepover, nobody that outside of, nobody that you like work with, or I mean, we kept to that because that just makes good sense. But like, no dating an ex, that one got broken. We kind of let go of a lot of the rules once the big one of being allowed to fall in love with one another, with other people, we experienced it and realized, oh, we're still okay. And not that it wasn't hard, and it's especially hard when you maybe lose a relationship. If I'm going through heartbreak and my husband is not, which has happened on more than one occasion now, but he still is kind of the main person I can go to for solace. Sometimes my friends don't quite understand that my other relationships, they're getting there now. But for a while, it was hard for them to understand that my breakups really felt like heartbreak. And they're like, oh, but you still have Stewart. And I'm like, I know, but it's still, I was grieving a loss at times that was hard for anybody except Stewart to really understand. So the other rules have fallen aside, but the main rule that we have now is that we have to hold each other's feelings and hold space for each other's feelings. And part of what used to happen between us is that, and it happens occasionally still, but now we're a lot more efficient with kind of like getting to the heart of it. If let's say he's going out with somebody on a night that I don't have plans, I might get grumpy about it or feel sad about it, even if I knew he had these plans, even if I'm perfectly content once he leaves, to be home and do my own thing. But if I have feelings about it, he used to say, why are you upset? You told me I could go. Like, what is wrong? As if like I wasn't entitled to my feelings. And now, as I say, the price of admission is whatever I'm feeling, you need to let me feel, and you need to help me through that feeling. So if I'm feeling lonely or insecure or jealous, I need to be able to voice it, and you need to reassure me, because that's usually what I'm looking for, is some reassurance that I am still special, that I am still loved, that we will have special time together at a later date. And once we kind of got to that, and he didn't have to go through feeling defensive, and I didn't have to feel like I needed to withhold my feelings because he would just not be able to handle it. Now it doesn't last long. If I have a feeling and I voice it, it's usually kind of over and done in 15 minutes, as opposed to my holding on to it for 3 weeks or something, and having it blow up later.
And how do you guys work around the feeling of like one person feeling that they got left behind? If let's say you're actively in a relationship with somebody at that moment, but Stu is not in one, it can be a common consensus that I hear from clients that I feel left behind. I feel as though, it's hard to grasp the idea. Maybe it's just not your turn right now, for lack of a better way, but it can feel as though, wow, I thought we were on the same page, but we're not. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, that's been very hard for me. Stewart has had, I call her Kiwi in the book, and he is still with her 9 years later. It'll be 10 years in March. So he has had her as a consistent other partner all this time. I, on the other hand, have had some long-term relationships that have ended. I've been in a good place for almost 4 years now, and I don't see it changing. But the times when I have had a relationship end and Stewart still had his long-term relationship, that was really hard. But I'd say I've navigated it 2 or 3 times now. It kind of depends on what you count as like, full on heartbreak, but I've gone through that. And it's been a very important time for me, getting back to what we talked about at the beginning, for me to remember that my primary relationship is really with myself. And that whenever I, am saying, oh, I need you, I can say that to an extent. And if I need Stewart to cancel a date because I want him to be home with me, I can do that. But I have really let go of the idea that I would ever ask him to end a relationship because my relationship ended. And we had to really get to that place together, because it's also not fair to his other partner.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody that he's been dating for 9 years. If my relationship ends, I'm not going to say you have to end that relationship too. It's kind of something we just kind of evolved into. It might be really hard for someone to understand. Now that I've been through it a few times, I do think of the care and the love that I get from Stewart as something I am entitled to, but I am not entitled to dictate his entire life.
Mm.
And so we have made this arrangement, over and rearranged it over the course of 16 years now. I'm not going to pull the plug on it entirely because I'm in a bad place. I can ask him for what I need from him,
Right.
but I don't need to control all of his thoughts and feelings and emotions and everything he's doing 24/7 because I'm in a bad place. It's not going to work anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I've tried that. It doesn't actually help in the long term for him to also be miserable alongside me. He's in a much better place for supporting me when he is maintaining what keeps him happy. And it's always worked out to my benefit in the end. The relationships that have ended for me have ended for good reason, and the relationships I'm in now are wonderful. So I don't really have an argument to make that it's to my detriment if he doesn't, that he doesn't need to mirror everything I'm experiencing in order for him to support me.
Now, how much relationship interaction is there? Is it very separate where you do your thing and he does his thing? Is there any crossover where you've ever met his partner, he's ever met any of your partners? How does that look like?
Yeah, we have met each other's primary partners. I have had more of those. He has the very consistent 9-year relationship and then other relationships that have kind of come and gone. So I have met his first Kiwi. And he has met my long-term relationships, but we don't all hang out together. That's not really our model. Some people call it kitchen table poly, where everybody's really forming a community together. And I know people who do that and love it, and it's just never been appealing to me. I have lots of my own friends, and I feel like coordinating our schedules is hard enough as is, let alone trying to get everybody in the same room at the same time. You know what I mean? So I don't aspire to that, but I understand why some people might. But it was important to me to have them meet each other and to everything be kind of above board and everybody have for my birthday party, I wanted to invite my partner of 4 years to my birthday party, and my husband had already met him. But in that case, my oldest son was going to be at my party. He's 22 now, and I wanted him to feel comfortable. So I made sure it was okay with him if I invited my partner, and they met at my birthday party. But I like that ability in the effort to be a more authentic person. And this was also the month before my book was coming out. So that's been a whole new level of everybody in the world knows, all of my
absolutely
distant cousins now know, it's a whole new level in the last 8 months that I was trying to prepare for to a certain extent, of wanting to be able to walk through the world as my authentic self always. And it feels great. There's a lot of freedom in it, but there was a lot of work that was required in order to get to this place.
How difficult was it to tell people about this? You referenced your son, you referenced cousins. I mean, how difficult was it to even begin that conversation to say, hey, this is what my husband and I have decided to do? How was that received?
Yeah, it's gotten easier over time. I mean, when you have read the book, my more opens with the scene where my oldest son found out about the open marriage, because my intention was to just keep it under wraps forever. And it was kind of my worst nightmare. He was 13 at the time, so 9 years ago he found out. And when that didn't kind of send me, into a death spiral, because I couldn't even imagine what would happen if he knew. It was so hard for me to wrap my head around
Right.
wearing the hat of a mom and a sexual being at the same time.
Mhm.
But from there, it's gotten easier. And then, my younger son found out when he was 14. My younger son has not read the book. My older son has, and that's great. That fits each of their personalities perfectly.
Mhm.
Um, it's just gotten easier and easier, especially as I feel more confident in where I am right now and in the choices I've made. Part of what I write about in my memoir is the shame that I had to overcome. And I didn't really know what I was doing and why I was doing it for the first several years. So I wasn't really in a place to say, hey, guess what I'm doing? It's a hot mess. You know what I mean?
Right.
I wasn't feeling proud of where I was, but I had to go through that mess. I don't even think of it with regret or as a mistake, because it was something I needed to do. Now I'm owning that whole part of my story too by putting it out in published form. But I'm able then to also, I was also able to kind of control the narrative to an extent by having the book and showing this was my arc. This is why it looked the way it looked then, and that's why it looks the way it looks now, or at least when the first book ended. I'm working on a second book now. But it's all been part of the process. And so I feel comfort and freedom and pride in just being myself, and it doesn't feel hard anymore.
And I like that message for people who maybe are just dipping their toe into it and realize it is really hard, that there
Yeah,
can be light at the end of the tunnel in that. But, time I think is imperative. Open communication is imperative. And I think you have to really get stripped down to the why. It can't just be, I'm interested in this. It has to be, what does this give me? What does this take from me? What does it give you? What does it take from you?
sure.
And deeper conversations. And when I see clients who come to me because they want help working out an agreement, with their partner, well, hey, we want to experience an open marriage, or we're wanting to do this, help us figure out these boundaries. I find that it's a consistent theme amongst people, what they're feeling. It's a
Yeah,
consistency. And what that tells me is that, a lot of people might be interested in this, but those fears are what keep people from it.
sure.
It's the same set of fears in most people. And, how much of that is societal programming? How much of that is how we were raised? How much of that is our own self-worth? It's an interesting examination when you think about, that and what people think of it.
I mean, it really lays bare just about everything. I mean, I can't think of something that is more likely to cut you to your core in terms of not just worth, but any abandonment issues or, um, just wanting to feel cared for and security and
Mhm.
wanting to control that which is unknown. I mean, so much of marriage is like, now I'm done. I have found my partner. And to be fair, I do have friends who maybe got married in their late 30s. As I said, I got married at 26, or friends late 30s, early 40s, who dated all through their 20s and 30s. And the idea of dating again, they're like, I would rather, peel my own toenails off than date again. And
Mhm.
that is fair. I feel like in part, this really spoke to me because I had never done that. I had had one boyfriend in college. I had never really explored myself as an adult woman. I had just kind of went straight into from a college boyfriend to the person I ended up marrying. And I think it isn't the choice that everybody wants to make, in part because they may feel like they've already done a lot of that
Mhm.
exploration pre-marriage. So it really depends on what your own, trajectory has been.
Mhm.
And some people want to explore this and never get married. They want to be,
Right.
just Oh, I know. I used the wrong term before. I called it solo poly, but it's monopoly when one person is dating and the other person isn't. Solo poly being when you're single and just
Yes.
have lots of different relationships. So my misspeaking earlier. But that's like a totally viable option too for a lot of people to still have, without ever having to get married or really tie yourself to another person, to still have loving, committed relationships in your life. I see that working for people too. So it's really
Well,
a
and
lot of options.
the moral of it all is everybody needs to find out what works for them. And I don't think that anyone should be in any kind of relationship if it doesn't serve you, you know, and if it's not serving you, have the conversation to talk about why it isn't. And if you
Yeah.
have a partner that's not receptive to that conversation, then that's something very different we need to look at, because everybody should be able to talk to their partner about whatever it is they're thinking or feeling without the repercussion of, okay, now we're getting divorced. We should be able to have a conversation. And I think that that's what's missing, is a lot of people have that fear of the repercussion of, if I'm to say I'm unhappy or I'm unfulfilled, the immediate answer is we're over, you know? And I like the message that, no, you can have a conversation and maybe your marriage can end up looking very different. Maybe it won't, but either way, it's important to be able to have the conversation. And that's what I really want to leave people with.
Yeah. And to add to that, I feel like one thing that can be hard is to say, I'm unhappy, I'm unfulfilled. And then whether saying it overtly or just it's kind of the elephant in the room, implying, and it's your fault.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very different thing from saying, I am feeling kind of, stagnant in my own life, in my own skin.
Mm-hmm.
And I need space within this relationship to explore that. And that's very different from saying, I need to look for another person who is going to make me happy and make me fulfilled. It's kind of like
100%, because nobody can make someone else happy. It all comes within us. But I think there's just such a reticence for conversation in general that so much of that is missed, you know?
I
So,
agree.
my message to people is always to talk about everything. And if you can't talk about that, that is the actual problem. That's actually bigger than whatever it is you can't talk about, because you need to be able to have the conversation.
Absolutely.
What would you give it, like, what kind of advice would you give to someone who wants to explore this or is thinking about it? You know, what would you like to impart as kind of those final thoughts of, if this is where you are, here's my advice for you.
If you're not in therapy, find a therapist.
Louder for those in the back, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I had a therapist that, my therapy sessions are a key component of my memoir because my therapist was so important to me. And then we also had a year of couples counseling, and the couples counselor we saw, and I think this is a common belief, is that, it was more about us getting the tools for us to continue on our own. Like, my individual therapy felt like it could go on forever. The couples counseling, I feel like even dedicating a year to it where you're getting tools is really important. And it doesn't always have to be both, or finding ways to get that kind of counseling, even if, I know it can be difficult to find the right person or to get it covered by insurance and things like that. But any investment you spend there, I think, is worth it. And just also, I think, setting aside the time to talk to one another in a way that's not just on the fly, like while you're getting the kids ready for school, you know what I mean? Or like, you can't do this as a dump. You have to really also go, third piece, go as slowly as the least enthusiastic person. It doesn't do any good to race to the finish line of, well, let's just try this. I'm going to go out with someone next Friday. I mean, that you can do a lot of intermediary things, even just by starting to talk about fantasies, even by, watching movies or reading books about it, listening to podcasts that talk about it, using that as a way in to talk about like potential pitfalls, things that are ways. I mean, that alone can be exciting too, to even, being able to talk about what it is that's interesting, and those things that are terrifying because my guess is you're going to find both, and both people are
Absolutely.
going to run up against both, and that's okay.
I agree with you. And I like that advice because I think the expeditious nature sometimes of people to be able to get what they've been wanting supersedes the idea of I need to be able to hold space for my partner as they meet me where I am.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I always have this tradition where we have a former guest that asks you a question, and I ask you to leave a question for the future guest, and creates this continuum amongst guests. And the question that was left for you, which is, what was your AOL screen name and why? Or if you didn't use AOL, what was a prior screen name you have used, and why did you pick that?
Yeah, I didn't use AOL, so I think the most appropriate way to answer this question would be to talk about my dating app names that I used
Yes.
before I was comfortable using my actual name. I'm not on the apps anymore. But if I were, I would be Molly. But I went through a few. The first one I do feel a little embarrassed about was Mercedes Invierno. And that was my Mercedes. We used to, back in the day in Spanish class, they would give us a Spanish name instead of our regular name, which is not done anymore because it
Mhm.
is cultural appropriation. And I get that. And then my last name, Winter, I turned into Invierno. And I think it was because I needed to have like an alter ego or something
Yeah.
that could be on these dating apps because I didn't feel comfortable being myself. And then my most recent one before I became Molly, I thought this, I called myself not a yoga teacher because I felt like every other woman in Brooklyn
Was
was a
a
yoga
yoga
teacher,
teacher.
but not as a diss. My sister is a yoga teacher. So not as a diss to yoga teachers. I love my sister. Um, but it was just so funny. I just was like putting that right out front, like not a yoga teacher. And so those were two that come to
And
mind.
now you've evolved to Molly. I love it.
Now I'm just Molly. Yeah.
All right, what question would you like to leave for a future guest?
Oh, so it can be like I don't have to know
Anything.
anything about them.
No,
Ooh, okay.
it's
I
just a
would
blanket
say,
question.
as a former middle school teacher,
Mhm.
I love what is your most embarrassing middle school memory?
Okay. I immediately was thinking about my own. Wow, I'm curious to see what the answers are going to be on this.
They're usually brutal.
It's
I taught, teaching middle school and living with students through their moments and trying to like let them know this is gonna be a funny story someday. I promise you.
you will use this someday. It's
Yeah.
such a pleasure to talk to you, Molly, and so enlightening. Once again, everybody, the book is More, a Memoir of an Open Marriage, and it was great to visit with you and discuss this in full.
Thank
Thank
you
you
so
so much.
much for having me. Appreciate it.
That was great. All right, thank you.